Hi, third graders. We're going to revisit Back of the Bus today. Remember, this is the story about Mrs. Parks and the boy that happened in December of 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama. But you have some schema about this situation. So today we're going to talk about words and kind of how words in a text have real life connections to what we have happening in our lives, and that can help us better understand the words or the phrases. So we're going to take a look at some things that were said in this particular story and how or what that really means. And then I'm going to share an experience from my life that I can connect to that. And you're going to get to do the same thing a little later today. So if I look on page 74 in this story, this is just the page where it's showing Mrs. Parks, and they're talking all about how she's sitting up front, right? And there's a spot in the story where the policeman comes on, and then the boy says that he's all shaky inside, right? So when we're all shaky inside, think about what that means in real life, right? If we're all shaky inside. So I have a chart here about word connections. So I wrote down the phrase, all shaky inside, and I got that on page 74, so I cited that page. And what that phrase means is to be scared, right? Or to be afraid. So he was worried at the time. Personal experience. This is my story. When was a time I felt all shaky inside, when I was scared or when I was afraid? And last August, so not even a year ago, my youngest son, Shane, he's in college. He went to the state of Oregon for the whole semester. So that means he left in August and he didn't come back until December. And I was very afraid and scared and nervous for him to fly on an airplane because it was still during the pandemic when there were no vaccines. People were still getting really sick. They still are now, but not like they were then. And I was very scared to put him on an airplane and fly him almost 3,000 miles away from home, and I wasn't going to be able to see him for a long time. So that was a time when I was all shaky inside. I bet you're thinking of a time when you were all shaky inside as well. Let's look at another phrase from this story. We're going to look back on page 70. Right, this is where they're all on that bus. This is at the beginning of the story. The bus comes to a stop. Right, here's the bus driver, Mr. Blake, up front. Lots of people in the seats, people standing in the aisleways. And this is what Mr. Blake says. Y'all gotta move now. It's Mr. Blake, the driver. I can't see him because of the people jam, but I know that growly old voice. So I wrote down the phrase, the people jam. What do you think the people jam actually means? Right? Well, it means to be crowded or too many people in a small space or in the same space, right? Times when we're kind of all crunched together, they mention them as lima beans in this part of the story. There was a time when I felt like there were too many people crowded into the same space. And it was last springtime, when we were in lockdown. So about the time when we were supposed to be in school, but we weren't allowed to go back. And I can remember going to the grocery store, going to Meijer, and there were so many people. Because I bet you remember the stories about people buying up toilet paper, and you couldn't find lots of types of food, and it got a little bit scary. And I remember being at the grocery store and thinking, there are way too many people here. They're all jammed in one space, and I didn't like that feeling. Kind of like the boy is feeling on the bus with all the people, and he can't see what's happening. There's one more spot in the story I want to share with you. It's on page 78. Okay, and this is towards the end of the story. Right? He and his mom are sitting in the bus. Mrs. Parks has already been taken away. He says at the end, I take out my marble and I start to hide it in my squeezy tight fist. Squeezy tight fist. I wrote squeezy tight fist on my chart. And I cited the page that I found that quote on. What does it mean? Right? It means that his hand is closed really tight. Right? He's holding on tightly to something. Has there ever been a time when you were hanging on to something so tightly you're afraid you're going to drop it or lose it? Something was going to happen to it. My story is a little different. I can remember when my kids were little, and they're in their 20s now, so they're older. But when they were really little and they would run, right, if you're in a crowd or at the store, I can remember hanging on to their hands really tight because I didn't want them to like sneak away or get away from me and get lost. So that was my personal experience, my connection to that phrase, squeezy tight fists. I can remember hanging on really tightly because I didn't want them to get away. I wonder what you can think of when there was a time when you had a squeezy tight fist. So, your job today, you're going to get to answer your own personal experience connected to these phrases in our story. Okay, and then tomorrow we're going to work on some vocabulary from the story because understanding vocabulary helps us understand other parts of the story and what's happening in the story.